Hello. Shalom, shalom. I'm having to use a third browser because I'm having trouble with my camera. So hopefully you guys can hear me or see me, or both. Shalom. Hey, good. Thank you, Leslie. I'm glad someone is here and can hear me. I just saw that Facebook does have sharing, so next week I'll try to prepare for that. Good on both. Thank you. Shalom, everybody. I'm going to give it just a few minutes. I got here a little bit late because I was having technical difficulties again. You've got no sound. I'm hearing that other people do, Joe. I don't see anything else I can do. Anybody else having sound trouble? Anybody else not having sound trouble? Shalom, Tracy.
Time to check his mute. It may have got accidentally turned off.
Good. Okay, so people are here. Got your volume down, Joe? Shalom, shalom. Okay, so let me rearrange my screen here a little bit, hopefully without boogering anything up. And we will get started. So our discussion tonight, actually for quite some time to come, is going to be the prophetic nature of a Messianic life. And so I was thinking about that late in the game. My job kept me pretty busy. I didn't get as much time in preparation as I wanted. Hopefully that won't affect us too much tonight. But late in my preparation, I thought the first thing we probably need to talk about is the fact that just believing in Messiah in and of itself is very prophetic. As a matter of fact, there is a verse in the Hikalut that says that the testimony of Yeshua is the spirit of Nebuah, and Nebuah being prophecy. So the confession of Yeshua is the spirit of prophecy. So just being a believer in Yeshua should, by virtue of that fact alone, make a person, first of all, believe in prophecy. Second of all, live sort of in an expectation of prophetic events. And of course, we believe that the next real prophetic event to happen, other than all of the signs, and we're going to probably mention that tonight, that we see occurring, the next big event is the coming back of Messiah. And so to believe in Messiah means to believe that he is coming back. I've always taught that is actually part of the Besorah, part of the good news of Messiah, is the fact that he is coming back. And so I'm going to read a scripture out of Kepha Bet, which is 2 Peter. And I believe we've already referenced this once or twice in the last study. but I think it's important to think about this. So I'm in Kethabet, 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 3. Knowing this first, that there shall come Acharit Hayamim, and we're probably going to talk about that at some length tonight. The Acharit Hayamim are, so there shall come in the last days mockers who scoff, following after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since our fathers died, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. Of this they are willingly ignorant, that by Devar of Elohim, the heavens were of old, and the earth emerged from water, and by means of the water, and those men were subject to the flood, because of whose deeds the world of that time was flooded, perished under that water. But the present heavens and earth are sustained by his Devar, and are reserved for fire on Yom Hadin, which is the day of the destruction of ungodly men. And so we're going to look at that quite a bit tonight, that day. Just trying to catch up on comments here, make sure I didn't miss anything too important. Okay. So, being a believer in Messiah is being one who is looking for the coming of Messiah. And there's multiple scriptures. We've already looked at a few of those, even in just the previous study that we did, that looking forward to his coming is something that Messiah expects of us. Just imagine it this way. Most every believer knows that the congregation of God, the congregation of Messiah, is called his bride. A bride waits expectantly for her wedding. And in ancient Judaism, that was even more heightened because there was an unknown day that the bridegroom would come and catch her. And that day, you could see that day approaching because the house that the groom was building was near completion. I always picture it as one of the last things that he does to the house is put on the door. Okay? And a door is mentioned quite a bit, well, not quite a bit, but every, here and there, concerning the end things. So she is, when the house is complete, she's pretty sure that the day is coming. And of course, we teach, and you'll hear this later, that the day of her wedding is called the day that no man knows, because only the father of the groom knows that day, because the father of the Jewish groom had to approve of the house that he was building for he and his bride to live in. So that's how I think about believers and whether or not they are living in expectation of Messiah coming. There could be some doubt about their faith, or it's certainly weak faith, in my opinion, if they don't think about it at all, especially in the day that we live in. And so that's one of the reasons that we're doing this study, is because we live in a day where it looks to me like it's getting ever closer to us, and it would be silly not to be ready. So we're looking at the prophetic nature of a messianic life, and I'm asserting to you that a messianic person should live in a bit of expectation of prophetic events. And so what is a prophecy, a nevuah? A prophecy is interpreted sometimes as something that is declared that will come to pass. That's not all that prophecy is, but that certainly is what a prophecy is. The noun prophecy. In regard to the Messianic life, there are things that we do, really things that we do every day, that are prophetic in nature, or that I should say it this way: they nurture the expectation of prophecy, the coming of Messiah, and the finishing of all things. The Elohim, God, structured our lives such that everything that we do in our faith, if we're doing it with faith and because of trust, because of faith, and we're following the model that he put down in the scriptures, then everything that we're doing is promoting our belief in in the coming of Messiah. And so the whole purpose of the Torah was to declare the Messiah, and that's in Romans 10:4. I used to make a joke about it. 10:4, good buddy. That's it. That's the goal of the Torah, is to declare the Messiah, to get the world to come to the Messiah. So life in faith in Messiah, especially in the Messianic walk, is very prophetic in nature. Everything that we do is wrapped up in prophecy. So any questions before I move on from that? Take a sip of coffee, wait for people to type, wait for the lag. Okay, if a question comes in, I'll try to address it. So, I had posted a little meme on this page, the Torah of Messiah. I didn't get a chance to do an introduction in this particular video because of the trouble I was having with Google, interestingly enough, Google Chrome. So, I posted a meme on the Torah of Messiah page. I posted it, I don't know, at the beginning of the week, maybe Tuesday. And then I posted another one today. Well, the one I posted on Tuesday, I reposted it today. And it's the one that is about, that has at the top of it the verse from Bereshit, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Okay, so, and that verse is, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. And of course, that is, in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. It's a simple sentence, but it's 7 words long. It's pretty benign in construction, and what it means on the plain level of reading is exactly what it says. God created the heavens and the earth. There are some people who want to read into that there are 2 creations. First, he created the universe, and it had a different set of people on it, and they were monsters, blah, blah, blah. That's a bunch of baloney. It's malarkey. And the reason is because of the following verses, and we will probably get into that tonight if things go like I expect. But what I want you to look at is the fact that it is a menorah. I do believe that this is a 7. This is a menorah. This is a sort of an image that we can look at and start to see things in regard to Messiah himself. Okay, and so I wanted to explain that. It's in that meme. Some of you may not have taken time to read it, but it is there. The World Week is an idea that has been discussed in Judaism for probably around 2,400 years. So, if not more than that. It may go all the way back to Moshe. I just don't know. But certainly it was an idea that was floated in the time of Messiah. And you see Peter mention it. And I think we've already covered that scripture study. But yourselves know full well that a day to Yeva is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. And so he was stating that to Jewish people, and he basically asserted that they understood this, that this was common knowledge, that this wasn't something that had never been taught or shared among Jewish people. So the idea is that there is a world week that is basically the plan of God for mankind. And what does that mean? That means that there are 7 1,000-year periods, each 1,000 years representing a day, and there are 7 days reserved for mankind. In other words, the plan of God for mankind would be finished in 7 days. All right? As sort of an allusion to that, a clue, a hint about that, then, and we consider each of the 7 words of this sentence as a possible hint about that day, then when we get to the 4th word in the sentence, and I'll paste it in here. When we get to that fourth word, you see it again in the sixth word, but this time it's slightly modified. And I don't want to get all bogged down in Hebrew. Hebrew is a tricky language for some people to learn. For me, it was relatively easy. I had a very good teacher, but it functions differently than English. And this word is really, I don't know of another language. I've studied French and Spanish and Greek. I've studied a little bit of German. I've toyed with it more than anything, that and Russian. And I haven't seen this in other languages, and that doesn't mean it's not there, but especially maybe the ancient languages have something like this. But the word et is not, it doesn't have a definition, it just has function. It's a grammatical pointer. And so whatever follows the word et, whatever is right behind that word, then the word or the subject that is before it, which may not be right in front of it, it may, like in this sentence, the subject is God, and it is right in front of et. Bereshit bara Elohim et. Okay, so that word is saying, so if we're talking from our perspective, looking at Aleph Tav, and that is the letters there, the Aleph Tav, if we're looking at it from our perspective, and Aleph and Tav we're talking, Aleph and Tav would tell us, Elohim on my right hand is doing something to Hashemayim on my left hand. Okay, so it's a direct object identifier. It's identifying the direct object that the subject is acting on with the verb. In our case, the verb is created, which is before Elohim's name. Word order in Hebrew is way different and more flexible than English. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. If anybody is confused by that, I'll try to word it a little more smoothly. But so it's pointing to an action, so it doesn't have definition. But what it is it's that anybody does in the Bible is done through et, okay, in the sense of acting on something else. And in this case, Elohim was acting on the heaven and the earth by creating them. Okay, so that word is the Aleph and the Tav, and of course we got our book of Revelation from Greek. Here probably knows that I believe that the Aramaic scriptures came first. Well, the Aramaic community either lost or never obtained a copy of the Hikalut from Yochanan, even though he lived in the Aramaic region after the Isle of Patmos. A lot of people don't know this. When he got freed from the island of Patmos, having been in prison there, wrote the book of Revelation, he actually went to what we call Western modern Turkey today and was the overseer of a congregation there. And so I believe in all likelihood that there were ancient copies of the Hikalut in Aramaic, maybe even in Hebrew, but we don't have them. So we inherited them from the Greek, and the Aramaic community of about maybe 600 or 700 years ago, I think, translated the Greek scriptures into Aramaic. So, but nonetheless, Yeshua is a Jew. He was talking to a Jew, Yochanan, and I believe he was speaking in Hebrew. And he wouldn't have said, I am the Alpha and the Omega. He would have said, I am the Aleph and the Tav. And so you see the Aleph and the Tav everywhere, and obviously you see it in this first sentence of the Bible. And you see it in position 4 and in position 6. And so representing the 4th day and the 6th day in all possibilities. So the world week in the Jewish mind is further divided into epochs of 2 days. Okay, so you have 2 days for Adam. You have 2 days for Yisrael, the nation of Israel. You have 2 days for Messiah. This is what Jewish people of antiquity thought about how long it would take for the Messiah to get here. Now I'll tell a little story about that. So 2 days for Messiah. And so that's 2 for Adam, 2 for Israel, 2 for Messiah. That's 6 days. So in 1 day left, and that last day is called the day of Yahweh, the day of, a lot of people in Judaism refer to him as Adonai, the day of the Lord. Okay, we refer to him by his name, and that's how the scriptures reference him, especially when talking about his day. Okay, why am I going over this? Because The Christian community, a lot of our dear friends and the people that we left behind when we began a Messianic walk, we didn't leave them behind. A lot of them just nudged us out. They worship Elohim on a different day than we do. And no fault of their own, they were told that was the Lord, that was his day. That's the day my grandfather, I tell this story often. I'm practically a doppelganger of my grandfather. I look a lot like him. I probably take after him in other ways. He's my maternal grandfather. But he was the oldest of 9 children during the Depression, had to go to work in the 4th grade, never really finished learning to read and write, and was pretty much illiterate, could write his name, and that was about it. And loved the Lord, loved God. He was in church every Sunday for the rest of his life after he met my grandmother. He met my grandmother. She told him she's not going to date him if he's not a believer. He went and considered faith. He became a believer, and he stayed that way the rest of his life and never knew any different. But by golly, when you were in his house on Sunday, you rested. It was the Lord's day. It was a day of rest. And so no fault to him because he couldn't read and figure it out on his own. He was trusting his teachers. But nonetheless, the believing community, most of it follows the popes who said that this is the day of the Lord. And where do they get that? They get that from one place usually, and that's the book of Hikelu, the book of the Revelation. When Yochanan the Revelator was on the island of Patmos and had this encounter with Yeshua, and he said, I was in Yom Yeva, and it gets translated into modern translations, starting with King James and on, as the Lord of the Lord. Even though nowhere else in Scripture is the first day of the week, Sunday, called the day of the Lord. You have the majority of people teaching that Sunday is the Lord's day. That is so far from the truth. And so we who believe in Messiah and follow him and worship on the day that he worshiped on, the book of Luke tells us that he was in the synagogue on the Sabbath, the Jewish Sabbath, every week as was his custom. So he was a believer in God. He was the Son of God, and he was sharing the Besorah, the good news of God, and he went to the synagogue to do that. And it was his custom to be in the synagogue. So, the Lord, what is it? I'm saying that it's the last day in that world week, according to ancient Judaism. So there is a world week. I'm going to review that. 2 days for Adam, 2 days for Israel, 2 days for Messiah, and then the day of Yahweh, the day of Adonai, the day of the Lord. However you want to call it, none of them are entirely wrong. The most accurate is to say his name, especially when you read it out of the scriptures. Okay, so people accept at face value the fact that is that day, but it's not. What I'm saying is there is a day that is his day, and it's the day of it's not a pretty day. Don't know what the weather's going to be. That's not what I'm talking about. But that phrase is in the Old and New Testament. What phrase? Yom Yahweh, the day of Yahweh, the day of the Creator, the day of Messiah. All right, I'm pasting. That phrase is in the scriptures, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, multiple times, and it's described on both sides of the book as a very similar day on both sides of the book. It never changes, okay? So I'm going to go to maybe 2 places in the Tanakh where we have that phrase. The first one I'll go to is Yeshayahu, Isaiah chapter 2. You guys still with me? You're quiet. Yeshayahu, Isaiah chapter 2, verse 12 is where I'm going to start. So I'm just going to read a couple of these that are in the Tanakh. The phrase Yom Yahuwah, the day of Yahuwah, the day of God the Creator, the day of Messiah, is in the Tanakh, the Old Testament scriptures, 18 times. And almost every time it's described in a very similar way. And Yeshayahu is probably, best I can find, the first mention of it in that way. For Yahuwah Tzevaot, and Tzevaot, I'll put that in our feed so new people can learn how to spell it and perhaps say it. For Yahuwah Tzevaot has a day. Tzevaot means armies. It's the plural of the word army. It comes from the word to direct, to command. I just got that same issue with my camera. Are you guys okay? Please let me know. So the Yahweh of armies has a day upon all that is proud and lofty, and upon all that is lifted up, and it shall be brought low. The world shall be brought low, and upon all the cedars of Lebanon that are high and lifted up, and upon all the oaks of Bashan. So in Yeshayahu we see that this day doesn't look pleasant. All right, Yeshayahu, I'll do one more in his book, and I'll do one from Yirmiyahu, who was a prophet about 100 or so, maybe 200 years after Yeshayahu. I'd have to check the chronology again. But so we will do Yeshayahu chapter 13. I'm going to look in verse 6. How, it says, for Yom Yahuwah, the day of the Lord, is at hand. As destruction from the Almighty shall it come. Therefore shall all hands be slack, and every heart of man shall melt. And they shall be affrighted. Pangs and throes shall take hold of them. They shall be in pain as a woman in travail. They shall look aghast one at another. Their faces shall be faces of flame. And so this is some pretty terrifying language. Spend a whole lot of time on that, but I wanted you to see that there are multiple places where this day is talked about in the Tanakh. All right, let's go to Yirmiyahu chapter 46. Like I said, this is another prophet. He followed Yeshayahu by 100 or 200 years. I can't remember exactly. Go to 46. And we'll start in verse 10. For Adonai Yahweh Tzevaot, there are people in the Messianic community who say that you cannot call him Adonai. I don't say that because the scriptures call him Adonai over and over and over again. They're ultra dogmatic about saying his name. I hope never to encounter people who are just ultra dogmatic about saying his name. He is called Adonai in many, many places in the scriptures, so it's not wrong. For Adonai Yahweh Tzevaot shall have on that day a day of vengeance, that he may avenge him of his adversaries. And if you remember, we started one of our studies in the last study or two, Yeshayahu chapter 61, where Yeshua reads in the synagogue, and that's when it says that he was in the synagogue on the Sabbath, and he stopped reading when he got to verse 2b, and he didn't talk about the day of the vengeance of Elohim, and we're going to hopefully look at that tonight. But this, Yirmiyahu is saying that the day of Yahweh is a day of vengeance, okay, and it matches what he said in Yeshayahu. So one more from another prophet, just to make this abundantly clear, that this day is terrifying. It's scary. It's not something that you want to just monkey around with. So I'm going to go to Joel chapter 2. And I'll get to your question, Joe. I just read it. Let's go to Joel chapter 2. Just start reading in verse 1. Blast the shofar in Sion, sound an alarm in my heart Kodesh. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for Yom Yahuwah comes, for it is at hand. A day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness, as blackness spread upon the mountains, a great people and a mighty. There has not been ever the like, neither shall be any more after them, even to the years of many generations. A fire devours before them, and behind them a flame blazes. The land is as Gan Eden before them, and behind them a desolate. Nothing escapes them. The appearance of them is as the appearance of horses and horsemen, so do they run. You should know what that language is referring to. Like the noise of chariots on the tops of the mountains do they leap, like the noise of a flame of fire that devours the stubble, etc., etc. So we looked at 4 places where the day of the Lord, Yom Yahuwah, is clearly a day of punishment, of wrath, a day of unkindness to mankind as a whole. So, I hopefully we've made that abundantly clear. Now I've got to get to Joe's question. How did the Catholic Church manage to change this clear language and people believe it? And I'm just going to say abracadabra, because people tend to believe people in authority. But bigger than that, when you're talking about the Catholic Church, let's say that's how Protestants believe it, because they just believe what mom and dad told them because the preacher said it, and it's been that way for generations, so they just believed it. But how did they change it? By the power of the sword. History is replete with information about Constantine. Teresa was right on the money there, but really he didn't take up the sword to enforce it. It took one generation. I believe it was the next pope that actually first used the sword to enforce it. He did make it law that you had to now worship on the day of the incomparable sun, Sol Invictus, which was his pagan religion his whole life up until the week before he died. But it was the next pope, and I want to say it was Tertullian. I'm not 100% sure about that. I'm pretty sure his name starts with a T, but I'm not 100% sure. He was the one who decided, well, now, if you're not going to keep the Sabbath with us on the day of the Lord, on Sunday, then we're going to kill you. And so when it became, death penalty to change it, then people were living in fear, and they yielded to the Catholic Church, and they had to. I've always said this. There's a book called The Conflict Between the Church and the Synagogue by James Parks. I think it might have ES on the end of it. And when I was reading his book, he makes a statement in his book that someone else will have to do the research to find out where they went. And who the they he was talking about was the Jewish believers in Messiah, because there's almost no trail of where they went. But I personally believe they went east, and I think one of the hints about that is Marco Polo found a community of believers in China who had very Jewish customs in their worship of Messiah when he got there in the 1200s, 1300s. I forget when. Very, very early medieval guy. So yeah, it was by the power of the sword. That's how he caused them to believe it and just accept it and not question it. Okay, so let's look into the Brit Hadashah for a brief spell, and let's see what it says about the day of Yahuwah. All right. So if you go to Maaseh Hashlichim, and that is Acts, and you go to chapter 2. And this is Shavuot, and that hopefully will come up later tonight. This is Shavuot that this is happening on. We are 27 days, am I right? 27?
33. Tonight's 34.
We're 27 days away from it because tonight is 34. So we're 26 days away from it. Or is it 16? 16.
Yes.
16 days away from Shavuot right now. So 16 days from now, 2,000 years ago, Kepha stands up and preaches the first message of the Besorah. And in verse 20, he says, the first scripture he ever quoted to preach Yeshua is out of the prophets. It's out of the book of Yoel that we just read. I may not have read the same verse that he read, but it would be right around there somewhere. We're starting in verse 17. It shall come to pass in the last days, says Elohim, that I will pour out of my ruach upon all flesh. Shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. And upon my men servants and upon my maid servants will I pour out my ruach in those days, and they shall prophesy, and I will show wonders in the heavens and signs on the earth, and blood and fire and vapor of smoke. The sun shall be changed into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the great and fearful day of Yahuwah shall come. So that's not the verse that we read out of Yoel 2 just a few minutes ago. That's actually out of the next chapter, and this is the prophet jumping back to before the day of Yahuwah. Okay, but if you remember, when we read in Yoel, the first verse in chapter 2 was shofar in Sion, and then he describes the day of Yahuwah. So the shofar starts that day. Okay, so the interesting thing is that it is the seventh day when you're talking about the world week. So you have 2 days for Messiah, 2 days for 2 days for Israel, 2 days for Messiah, and then his day. Okay, that's the seventh day. And so you could say that Shabbat, in that sense, being a picture of the seventh millennium, is the day of Yahweh, his day. And of course, he calls it his day. Okay? So if any day of the week is his day, it's Shabbat, the seventh day. All right. So, and we as Messianic believers who worship Yeshua and follow him and do as he did, himself having worshipped on Shabbat, taught on Shabbat in the synagogues, as his custom was, that's what we do. Live our lives really around Shabbat. And so we're participating in a rehearsal of sorts, if you will, to prepare for the coming of Messiah, and we do so in microcosm every single week. Are there any questions? Do I still have you? I look, it kind of looks like I've got you, but I'm not 100% sure. Okay. Yeah, I'm still seeing activity, so I'll move on. Okay. So, that Acts chapter 2 is one place where the Brit Hadashah talks about it. There are 4 other places where that day is mentioned. Now, I'm not going to read them all because I want to move on. There are 4 other places where that day is mentioned, and all of them say very similar things. And as a matter of fact, Philippians chapter 5, verse 2 says, you know that day, the day of Yahweh, is in the night. Okay, so Shaul is telling us about a particular day that sneaks up on people, that surprises people, that robs people. Okay, that fits the theme that we've already talked about. In 1 Corinthians 5, verse 5, it basically says there something like, to deliver, this is when Shaul is talking about the man that he kicked out of the synagogue. We're handing him over to Hasatan to save his soul on the day of Yahweh Yeshua. And so he's accrediting that seventh day of the world week, and he's giving it to Yeshua. And of course, because Yeshua is one with his Father, that's absolutely correct to do. Shaul wouldn't be wrong. He's writing Holy Writ, for Pete's sake. So, So we had another opportunity for a New Testament writer to change the day to Sunday, but he didn't do it. He's kept the day of Yahweh as this day of vengeance. Alphabet, chapter 3, verse 10. But the day of Yahweh will come as a thief in the night. He says the exact same thing that Shaul does over in 1 Thessalonians. In which the heavens shall pass away with great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are in it shall be burned up. So all of our New Testament writers, and every time they mention the day of Yahweh, they call it, they basically are naming it, describing it as a day of judgment. Amen, Joe. It is. It is a picture of, it is a mini Pesach, and we are going to talk about that later in this study. And it is a picture of Yom Yahweh. Is it any wonder that getting to it sometimes is very difficult? When you live the Messianic life and you're trying to get to Friday evening and have it all prepared, you want it to be the best Sabbath ever. That's because we want every Sabbath to get better than the last. And it seems sometimes like that's the way it happens. But sometimes that sixth day is an epic struggle, and that's what we're seeing in the world right now. We're at the end of the sixth day. We're right on the evening of the Sabbath of mankind, and there's this epic struggle to try to prevent it from happening. And that goes on in microcosm in your homes. Anybody here who's been keeping Sabbath for any length of time willing to testify to that for our newer people? My wife is raising her hand. The bread won't rise. The dogs are sick. Anything that can come up seems like it always comes up to try to interrupt that day. But those of us who trust in Messiah and fight through, we end up having a good Shabbat anyway. Let's see. Okay, well, I can't do anything about your connection, but are y'all still getting feed here? Are you with me? Next time we might do a Zoom and see if that goes better.
I can't fit all the people on there.
Yeah, we can. Okay. Where did I leave off?
Keeping Shabbat is hard sometimes to fight through it.
All right. Okay, so I've got a couple people having video and sound trouble. Do we need to try to restart this? Or do you guys want me to push through?
They're having internet problems again. Shelby and Josh are having them too.
Yes, that doesn't help me, Jeanette. Are you guys here? Or is that you want to restart? Be more clear. I have another one. Y'all are being vague, being ambivalent. I think those are all yeses. Just keep going. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. So yeah, it's sometimes a struggle to get to Shabbat. And so that fits what the world is going through, and it fits about the seventh day. Let's go now to Vayikra chapter 23 and begin to talk about these days. And we're going to start with Shabbat, but let's go there and just look at what the scriptures say about the Mo'edim. Vayikra chapter 23. And Yahweh spoke unto Moses unto Bnei Israel, and say unto them, the Mo'edim of Yahweh. And the first thing that I want to point out about that is him. These Mo'edim belong to him. They are not the feasts of the Jews. And so the English word from the phrase that I just spoke and put into the text there, that most translations use, the feast of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to be Mikre Kodesh, that is, sacred assemblies, set apart, consecrated assemblies. Even these are my Mo'edim. And then he tells you what his Mo'edim are. And I'm going to define that word later, Mo'edim, because I know there's some newer people that may not know what it means. 6 days shall work be done, but on the seventh day is a Shabbaton. That's a doubling of the Sabbath. It's basically saying this day is extra important. A Mikra Kodesh. All right, so I'm going to put that in there. Most of your standard English translations probably say something like a sacred assembly, which is not wrong. We transliterate it because the words themselves, moed and mikra, have deeper meaning than what our standard English translations give us. And so we're going to look at those. So I'm going to read that again. The Mo'edim of Yahweh, which you shall proclaim to be Mikre Kodesh, even these are my Mo'edim. 6 days shall work be done, but on the seventh day is a Shabbaton, a Mikra Kodesh. You shall do no manner of work. It is a Shabbat unto Yahweh. In other words, this is his. It's not the Jewish Sabbath. I almost cringe when people say, you keep the Jewish Sabbath. No, I keep his Sabbath. He put it in the custody of our Jewish people, but it belongs to him. Okay? So they are his feasts. They are his assemblies. All right? So let's look at Shabbat a little more deeply. Actually, first, let's look at Moed first. Because we are talking about in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 23, verse 1, we're talking about all of the feasts, all of the Moedim that are going to be listed there. We're talking about all of them when we call them a Moed. So let's define what a Moed is. A Moed is, we've translated it already as, in a weak way, as feast. But that's not really what this Hebrew word is saying. If you look at the word moed that I put in there in the Hebrew, it's 4 letters. The root, all Hebrew words come from either a 2-letter or a 3-letter root. This comes from a 2-letter root, and that root is ed. And that word ed means witness. Okay? The 3-letter root, you just stick a yod in front of that and it becomes ya'ad. And ya'ad means betrothed. And where did that come from? Why that? Okay, so a moed is a time of witness. It's a time that is firmly established. It's an appointed time. It is you could say, date in God's date book where he set an appointment with mankind every week for 7,000 years. And so if you were to grab his day planner and open it to any Sabbath for 7,000 years, he's got an appointment set to meet with us. That's right. So where does this come from? Is this the first mention of the Moedim? No, it is not. So we're going to go now to Bereshit, Genesis chapter 1. Back to where we started. We're going to start in verse 14. And Elohim said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for Mo'edim, and for days and years. In most standard translations, that probably says something like seasons. So this is the plural of the singular Mo'ed. Let them be for signs, and we're talking about all of the lights in the sky. We're talking about the sun, the moon, and the stars and the planets. The planets were seen as stars back then. Okay, we call them planets because they are different entities, heavenly entities, and they behave differently than stars do. Those things were put in the sky on the fourth day. Now, I want us to look at our menorah. I put it on the Facebook page. You're looking at the logo every time that I've typed in, but it's tiny there. If you can click on it without ruining your video, you see a menorah there. And you see the feasts listed across the top if you're looking at the one that I posted on the Facebook page. And so we started our sacred year this year with Passover, like we do every year. Passover, Matzot, first Omer, and Shavuot, which is the fourth. Okay? And light was created on the fourth day. And of course, fire came down from heaven at Shavuot 2,000 years ago. So there's a link there. So on the fourth day, after he had already created the heavens and the earth, in other words, the sky and the land, he drew the land out of the water, he separated the water from the water and created a firmament. He called out of the water, and then he created all of the plant life, and he created, I believe that's it. And then on this day, the fourth day, then he creates the sun, the moon, and the stars. He created all the plant life on the third day, which is Tuesday. It starts on Monday night. The third day starts. And so he created all of the plant life on the Tuesday of the week. And then on Wednesday, he created light. And it's interesting to me, if we're talking about the prophetic nature of our lives in Messiah, I tend to start getting into more of a struggle in the realm of the spirit by Wednesday. It's usually harder for me to actually do at lunchtime, to do my daily prayer, which is the daily psalm, which is 94, which happens to be about warfare and vengeance. So it's almost like prophetically, it's alluding to the beginning of the Messianic age. Starts with all this. It starts with light, but it also starts with this great contention. So that's me. That's personal. I don't know if anybody else goes through that, but I do. I've noticed it. I don't dwell on it. I don't dread it. I don't dread Wednesday. But every once in a while I say, it's Wednesday. I can just about know what day of the week it is by what I sense in the realm of prayer. So he created the light on those days, and they were created from Mo'edim. What does that mean? We look at the sun and the moon and the stars in order to determine when these feasts occur, except for Shabbat. Okay? We have been tracking Shabbat according to the manna for the last 4,000 years. Okay? So for the first roughly 2,000 years, mankind knew when the Sabbath was, but for about 400 years when they were in Egypt, actually it's less than that of actual time in Egypt as a people, they forgot. They lost track of Shabbat, and so the manna for the purpose of resetting the clock of the Sabbath, to tell the Jewish people when the Sabbath was. And it's interesting to me that Yeshua comes and calls himself the manna that came down from heaven, and the whole believing world ignores the fact that the manna was used to set the clock of the Sabbath, and they worship on a different day. Yeshua is a Jewish person, and he said that to Jewish people. They knew what he was talking about. And one thing that I wanted to talk about, since we're back in Genesis, is that I do believe that first verse is a menorah, but I also believe that chapter 1 itself is a picture of a menorah, because you have 7 days mentioned. You have 7 times God says this phrase. Let me find it right quick. I think he only says this one that I'm about to paste in there 6 times, because I think he modifies it when he talks about the Sabbath. That says ki tov. He saw the light that it was good. Okay? And so everything that he created he called tov, and that's that second word on the left there. The 3-letter word is tov. And that means perfect. That means without a blemish. That means absolute. There was absolutely nothing wrong with it. Okay? And I think he says it was very good about the Sabbath. I'm not sure which. I didn't have time to find that. But the other phrase that I know is in there 7 times is
Very good.
No. This one right here. And so this one kind of alludes to the menorah of the world week. Vayehi erev, vayehi boker. And there was an evening and there was a morning. That is in there 7 times. All right? He said that about each day. There was an evening and there was a morning. A day, the 2nd day, 3rd day, 4th day, 5th day, 6th day, and the 7th day. Okay, so I just wanted you to see these 7s in there, which are allusions to the menorah. And we may come back to this chapter and look at sort of even more prophetic things about what was created on what day. I will go ahead and say, I've already mentioned Tuesday, so let's go ahead and say that. Let's talk about that. Go to Yochanan chapter 2. I think it is told me of Betsy. I saw that. Yochanan chapter 2.
Very good.
I didn't want to say it unless it was true, so I waited.
Very good.
It was very good, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you go to Yochanan chapter 2, this is at the very, very, very beginning of Yeshua's ministry. As a matter of fact, it's almost kind of before he began his ministry. Okay, it's interesting to me. I'm just reviewing the previous chapter for a second. So basically, at this point in the book of Yochanan, all that has happened is that he has briefly described the ministry of Yochanan Hamatbil, the immerser. Then he described the calling of his first Talmidim, and in particular, he described the calling of Nathaniel, and then immediately after he got some of these guys sort of following him, then it says, on the 3rd day there was a wedding in Cana. And so you have this being after Yeshua was immersed, but Yochanan isn't doing as much of a chronology of things as he's tying it to the feast. This is my favorite Besorah because he ties it to the feast. Just about everything that he talks about, he ties it to the Jewish feast. And I've told you this, there are scholars, theologians that teach that John was the least Jewish of them all in the way he wrote his Besorah, and I completely disagree. I think he was the most Jewish. He spent 5 chapters on Passover, where the rest of them give Passover about 10 verses, maybe. So I completely disagree. And Yochanan covers Passover about 3 times. So this is the beginning of Yeshua's ministry after he's called his first Talmidim. And it says, on the 3rd day there was a wedding in Cana. I already told you that day is Tuesday. So this is obviously in the day part of the day, or it might have started on Monday night, which is the beginning of Tuesday in the biblical mind, the beginning of the third day of the week. The wedding might have been that night. We don't know. In fact, after thinking about it, maybe it was because they were drinking. They were drunk. And so Yeshua began his ministry, according to Yochanan, his best friend who was there. Matthew and Mark and Luke were not there at the beginning of his ministry, so they take a different tact on it. But Yochanan was there. He got called in the previous chapter. Hopefully everybody's with me on that. So he sees this, and he takes note of the fact that the first thing Yeshua does ministerially is to go to a wedding and turn water into wine. And of course, we say it every week in our worship on Shabbat. Baruch atah Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen. Amen. Who creates the fruit of the vine. And Yeshua did a creative act. He created wine by taking water and making wine. And that's very similar to the creation day that was the second day, where he turned, he called the land out of the water. So Yeshua began his ministry at a wedding on the third day. I just wanted to show you that. I'm going to take a little bit of a break and regroup and see if there's any questions. And hopefully you're still with me. Everybody there? Yes. Thank you for saying that. I'm gonna. I don't know if you want me to out you on your real name, but Deborah. But thank you for saying that. But yes, it is customary for a lot of Jewish people, especially in Orthodox and more traditional circles, that they marry on a Tuesday. And the reason for that is because what was created on Tuesday was all the trees that bear fruit. And so the idea is that the bride should have that blessing over her union, because traditionally, and I wish it were that way still today, women didn't have their first union with a man until the day they were married, and for them that would have been on Tuesday, and they are hoping for the blessing of the repeated, because everything that God says echoes into time, and the Jewish people believe that echoes into time, and let everything bring forth fruit. And so she wants to bear fruit, she wants to have children. So a lot of them do get married on Tuesday for that very reason. No, not Shavuot. I don't know what you're alluding to there, Betsy. If we're looking at a menorah, then you're looking from right to left. If you're looking at the one that I posted on the Facebook page, you see all the 7 feasts there. Shavuot is on the 4th branch of the menorah. Okay? That's where we are in regard to the feast. In other words, we've seen Passover fulfilled. We've seen Matzot fulfilled by Yeshua, Passover by Yeshua, Matzot by Yeshua. We've seen the first Omer fulfilled by Yeshua, and we've seen Shavuot fulfilled by Yeshua. But the remaining 3 are yet to be fulfilled. We've been rehearsing those remaining 3 for the last 2,000 years. We've been looking back on those others for the last 2,000 years. And Yeshua set that tone at the Passover Seder when he said, he took the 3rd cup of the Passover Seder and he said, "Do this to remember me." So he was telling us to keep the feast of Passover, which goes all the way through Shavuot. It's one season. It's really technically one Mo'ed, one Chag, one feast that actually lasts, 50 some odd days long, depending on when Passover falls in the week. So he set the tone that we're looking back at those feasts to commemorate him, but we're looking forward to the next 3 in order to anticipate his coming. So In that sense, no. So if you're looking at the menorah, Shavuot is on the fourth branch of the menorah. So we have, but we only have one day. So I saw a question, I think it was Jamal, how long do we have left? So if we're looking at the world week as those 7 days, not the feasts, because the feast and the days don't directly line up. They do, but I'm going to try to explain that. If we're looking at them as days, if we're looking at then we're on the 6th branch of the menorah, so there's 1 day left. We're almost to that 7th millennium. So if I'm not mistaken, I haven't looked at a Jewish calendar in a while, but if memory serves, we're in the year 5780 on the Jewish calendar. In other words, if you go to Haaretz or the Jerusalem Post or one of the newspapers of Israel and you look for the date, that's the date that they're going to put at the top of the newspaper. 5780, I think, is where they are. So you look at that and you think, okay, well, we're supposed to be creeping up on, so I'm saying we're somewhere in this area, 6,900 and something years, because I'm saying that we're almost, no, I'm sorry, 5,900.
5780 between 6,000.
No, 5780 is 220 years. So,
Oh, that's right.
so we're possibly, I believe, in 5,900 and something. So why the difference? Why do the Jewish people say it's 5780? Because a guy named Hillel II. Don't get him mixed up with the Hillel that preceded Yeshua. This is a guy that came about 600 years, 500 to 600 years after Yeshua, who was a rabbi who decided the calendar. In other words, they were following the way that God said in Genesis chapter 1 and setting the feast days according to the sun, the moon, and the stars. And the moon was the one that determined the Chodesh. The stars helped determine the years and give signs of prophecy. They were also for signs. Primarily, the stars are for signs. The sun and the moon established the days and the feasts. So technically the Sabbath is established by 7 cycles of the sun, or 6 of them, and then the 7th cycle of the sun is the Sabbath. Okay, so the rest of the feasts are established by the moon, and we know we teach that it's also linked to the barley of Israel, because the barley of Israel has to be ripe in order for that first Chodesh to be declared. So that's how it went from way back in Abraham's day, because I do believe that there was feast keeping back then, even though you don't see it in the scriptures. I think there are hints enough there. Jacob built Sukkot, named a town Sukkot. Melchizedek brought bread and wine to Abraham. I believe that was at the season of Passover. So I believe that those feast days were alluded to in the ancient fathers, but we've had them since the time of Moshe, which is what we read in Vayikra chapter 23, Leviticus 23. So we had them there. So for 2,000 years in temple times, all the way through to about 600 AD, the feasts of Yah were calculated by the Jews by the biblical method. Scattered in 600 AD, and they were concerned about, primarily I think it was travelers going from one side of the Roman Empire and then maybe the Byzantine Empire, going from one side of Europe to another, and they kept the feast over here in this side, or maybe they went from south to north. They went from Israel and went all the way up into the Germanic nations or areas, and they went up there, and they kept the feast down here, and then they go up there, and they're just now keeping them, because the barley wasn't ripe up there. And so they didn't want to have confusion about when the feasts were kept. They didn't have the advantage of internet and telephones and telegraphs and all that kind of stuff. So he decided to create a calendar. And what he did is, knowing about the world week, this is key. He understood that there were 2 days for Adam, 2 days for Israel, 2 days for Messiah. And so he understood that in his day, which was roughly 1,400 years ago, that at least 4,400, 4,500, 4,600, somewhere along in there, years had passed. And to a Jewish mind, that meant, oh my gosh, where is the Messiah? Because he's supposed to be here by now. And I've taught this back in those days. Jews started questioning it, and so they removed the book of Daniel, and there are communities that said, do not read the book of Daniel. If you do, your bones will explode. That is how dreadfully they did not want them to read Daniel, because it so accurately predicted Messiah's coming. And I taught a drosh on this, 2 Shabbats ago, where I detailed the timeline and showed you how pinpoint accurate Daniel was in regard to the historical events that happened after Daniel and before Messiah that told the Jewish people that Messiah was coming. That's why there was so much excitement. That's why there were multiple false messiahs in his day. A lot of people don't know this. There was another guy named Yeshua who was going around before Yeshua showed up calling himself Messiah. And he's mentioned in the book of Acts. And history records him, and Josephus records him. And so there were multiple false messiahs that showed up at that time. There was a very messianic expectation, and one of the reasons for that is, like I said, Cephas said, you're a Jewish people, you know this, a day Yahweh is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are a day. So they were expecting Messiah to show up at the end of 4,000 years, and he did, exactly. And we know that, and we see that, and we have the Ruach HaKodesh to reveal that to us, and we have history to firm it up, and we have the accuracy of Daniel's prophecies to make it true to us. And this guy, Hillel II, probably encountered that when he was starting to do the math. And he thought, oh my gosh, I can't have that. I can't tell the whole Jewish world that Messiah is already here. So what he did, he backed it up 200 years or so, and there might have been some inaccuracy in his timing because of I want to say he's a Babylonian rabbi. I'm not sure that he was in Jerusalem when he made his calendar. I'd have to check that. It's been a long time since I've read about it. But the Babylonian captivity did leave question in mind as to when time was, and they stopped tracking it then. But like I said, we have the benchmark of history to show us. We know the date that Cyrus wrote his decree. Artaxerxes wrote his decree. And so the decree went forth in stages, and the exit and the return went forth in stages, and I've taught on that at length. So yes, Maureen, the genealogies recorded in Scripture are part of the clock. Yes, but what I'm talking about is historical events, which I just mentioned. So Hillel II didn't want to basically make it obvious that Messiah should be here already and give any credence to the story of Yeshua, so he monkeyed with the calendar, and so that's why it's off by somewhere in the neighborhood of 220 years, maybe less, maybe a little bit more. We don't know. I saw Joe post and say it could be months away. I do believe it could be months away. I do believe that this fall, on Yom Teruah, we could hear the shofar blow, and things could change drastically for this world. And I'm spending time trying to prepare myself for it because it's entirely possible. I can't say that it is going to happen, but I can say this: I don't want to be jacking around this year, that's for sure. But I also don't want to get lax if it doesn't happen this year in the fall. So it's foolish to live that way in whatever age you live in, because again, you don't know when you're not going to have a personal departure of your own all of a sudden. So anyway, we are very, very close to the end of the 6,000 years, beginning the 7th millennium, which is the day of Yahweh. So we've had 2,000 years to rehearse Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot to prepare for them. And so that's the second and third candles from the left, if you're looking at the feasts. So I'm trying to read comments and see if I need to answer them, that kind of thing. That's why I'm hesitating a little bit. And look at my notes. Okay, so there's no feasts again. So since Shavuot, we've had almost 2,000 years go by since Yeshua left the earth, and we haven't had another major prophetic event other than the signs of the times. Okay, and so I do believe that Yeshua is going to come back on Yom Teruah, and that is symbolic of our Shabbat. So we return into His presence every Shabbat when we light the Sabbath lights, when we gather around the Sabbath table, and we say certain blessings. But before that, during the week, we do what, at least we, this little tiny Messianic community, we do what the Kohanim would have done in the temple every day. And so there are certain prayers that were prayed in the temple every day. And we do customary ones that have had to be recorded into Siddurim because people don't go to synagogue every day like they used to 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. So they don't remember all the prayers, although if you do them long enough, you do remember them. So we do our prayers out of a Siddur that were prayers that were said in the time of temple service every single day. And so if you know what I'm talking about, you know about the daily Tehillim, the Psalms that we do every day. We do the Shema every day. We do multiple things every day in regard to prayers that are very prophetic in nature. And so just like the 7 days of the week probably allude to things prophetically, and Elohim was doing all of His creating on the 6 days, and then He rested on the 7th day. And we go out and do all of our creating, and mankind as a whole goes out and touches the earth. Mankind as a whole goes out and touches the trees. He goes out and touches the seas. He goes out and touches the beasts of the field. He interacts with everything that God days. And what He's supposed to do on the 7th day is not touch all those things unless they need help, but to rest and to give them rest, and to spend time with Elohim on His day. So we try to allude to that and step into that every single day of our lives. So our day starts at night, and when we lie down, we say the Shema, which is what the Shema says, is to talk about these words when you lie down and when you rise up, and when you go on the way. And so that's how we begin our day, is when we lie down, we say the Shema. When we rise up and sit, we say the Shema. When we go about our way, we say the Shema. So, everything that we're doing is prophetic in the sense that we're commemorating what has already been done, we're doing what God is telling us to do, and we're alluding to what is about to come. And so if you look at the Tehillim for the week, you see, you can start to see some prophetic things being spoken on each day of the week. And so if you know your Siddur very well, it's 24, 48, 82, isn't it?
Yeah, 82, 94, 81, 93, 92.
So there are numbers of the Tehillim, the Psalms, in order as we have them in the daily prayer section. And what that was, and I can't remember if it was Mincha or Shacharit when those particular Psalms were prayed in the temple, but it's known Jewish history and custom that those were what were prayed at the temple at a certain time. I want to say it's the Mincha, but I'm not 100% sure about that. It doesn't matter because we're not trying to recreate the temple in that sense. We're in a spiritual Beit HaMikdash right now, but you can go look at those, and I've struggled with whether or not I want to do that right now in this study or do it later. I think I want to do it later. But I just wanted to bring it up for those of you who are doing the prayers on a daily basis to look at them and start to look for things that we're going to start talking about in regard to the feast and see if you see them in there, and I believe you will. So,
Hey, Keelan,
yes.
It's something that he created, the seed-bearing plants, fruit-bearing plants, the day before he created the moon, the stars, and the sun, that we call the Mo'edim from. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Their survival is from the sun and all, but they were created before.
Yeah.
And we call the Mo'edim by those, if the barley is ripe, we call, Pesach. You know what I'm saying? By
Yeah.
the Kodesh. Anyway.
I already brought that up. I think you were out of the room.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so let me regroup here. I've got a couple of comments I need to cover. Yeah, you get an updated Siddur and all of a sudden you're tripping over words that you're saying automatically because you say them all the time. I'm still struggling to get it right on Shabbat on a couple of them. You have to really concentrate, and that it's a good thing. It's kind of an exercise in refocusing your prayers. So what we're going to do now is let's talk about Shabbat a little bit. So obviously it's the seventh day of the week. We've already talked about the fact that it starts on Friday night. That, if you're not familiar with it, is because in Bereshit, because of that phrase that I put in there, Vayehi Boker, and there was an evening and there was a morning. Our Jewish life is so prophetic because we are starting our days when everyone else is ending theirs, and we start our Shabbat when everyone else is starting their revelry. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about in living a Messianic life and how prophetic it is because when we actually take our time out to set apart and declare and consecrate Shabbat starting on Friday evening, we are directly opposing everything that is going on in this world. We are sticking out like sore thumbs. We're not participating in what most of the world is doing, especially the younger people. That's the day that all bets are off and do whatever they want. They throw off their shackles and they go and you know what happens. And Friday night is for high schoolers is a lot of them is football and revelry and not that that's bad, but it's certainly a distraction from actually worshiping God. And people can go out there and shout and holler and cheer and get all joyful because somebody moved a pigskin down the field, but they don't want to worship God at home. It's just a stark contrast between our life and the life of the rest of the world if we're doing what Elohim says to do on Erev Shabbat, and that is to set it apart. And how do we do that? We do that by beginning it with yes, thank you. I meant to put 81 on the fifth day. That was a fat finger because I knew 81. Melanie and I were saying them, so thanks for that correction. The fifth day is 81. Mm-hmm. So just by nature of not doing anything else on the Sabbath, we're being very prophetic because the bride of Messiah, I believe personally, goes into the cheder, the room up in heaven, and hides and gets quiet and has a Sabbath up there in a sense and gets married and participates as the bride. And that goes back to Mo'ed. Did you catch that? Mo'ed comes from a three-letter root, Ya'ad, which means betrothed. Okay? So these Mo'edim are signs that we are his bride. The very fact that we observe his feast is basically us showing that we're studying and keeping the ketubah.
I wonder if Yom Teruah was on a Tuesday this year.
I don't know. I think it might be. Somebody look, September 17th or 18th, what day is that on this year? Melanie got Tuesday. It would be cool if it was. So we're keeping these feasts, and they are rooted in the word betrothal, and we are the bride of Messiah, and this is a sign, and like I said, we're showing our bridegroom that we are studying the ketubah. What am I talking about? Yeshua went to a wedding on a Tuesday. That was a prophetic event, I believe. He created on the third day. He created the fruit of the vine, which was created originally on the third day of the week, 4,000 years before that. And so he's at a wedding. In the Jewish ceremony, not only did what was she doing for the time period when the bridegroom was preparing the house, was building a house. Yeshua said at Passover, I go away to prepare you a place. There are many rooms in my Father's mansion. If it were not so, I would have told you in my Father's house. If it were not so, I would have told you. But because I go away, I'm going to come, and I'm going to take you, and where I am, you may also be. That's in John 13 and 14. And so, Yeshua said those kinds of words to us, and that was a betrothal. That was the sealing of the contract. That was the beginning of our betrothal, was at Passover. Okay? So he has betrothed us to him, and we're going to get married on Yom Teruah. Okay. I got a bunch of text popping up. It's distracting me a little bit, but that's okay. So I was going somewhere. I need to think a minute. Get back on track. So we're betrothed to our Messiah. We've been waiting for 2,000 years for him, and he has told us to prepare that he would come back for a bride who is spotless. And we've been given a ketubah. What is the ketubah? The ketubah is the bridal contract. So I said that we signed a bridal contract on Passover. Yeshua made the covenant with Israel on Passover 2,000 years ago. And anybody that has come into faith in Messiah has basically entered into that covenant of betrothal with him. And so we, as his bride, even though we're millions of people, we are one entity, and we are waiting for him to come and take us. And so he's going to do that. But in the meantime, we are going to... darn it, I just got derailed again.
In the meantime, we're going to make ourselves spotless.
We are going to study the ketubah. What does the ketubah represent? So that ketubah is the contract that a bride and a groom sign before her father on the day of their actual erusin, their betrothal. The day of Ya'ad, you might say, their Mo'ed, their appointed time. So they get together and they sign this contract, and they seal it by drinking a glass of wine. Each, the father, the son, and the daughter, or the future son-in-law and the daughter, partake of the wine and seal the contract. Well, that was done in Yeshua. Yeshua took the third cup of the Passover Seder and said, "This is the renewed covenant in my blood," and basically betrothed us to him at Passover. And so for 2,000 years, we've been studying the ketubah. That's what a bride would do. She would look at the bridal agreement, the ketubah. Ketubah comes from the word katav, which means to write. It was a written agreement. And so she would study her ketubah and make sure that she did her part. And a lot of times in antiquity, they would say, you have to do thus and so to make sure you're beautiful when I get here. I want you dressed this way. I want you, some of it was probably very detailed. But anyway, she would study the ketubah and find out what she had to do in order to prepare for her wedding. And so that's basically what we've been doing for the last 2,000 years as a bride. Hopefully, very few of us have been studying the contract. What's the contract? The Torah.
The word.
The Torah itself is our contract. That is the ketubah. Yeshua said this is a renewal of the covenant. The covenant was given in the Torah at Passover. 2,000 years before Yeshua came the first time. He's renewing it 2,000 years later. And here we are 2,000 years removed from that. And we've gone through Passover 2,000 times almost. And this year Yom Teruah is on a Shabbat. That could be very, very prophetic because it is the day of Yahweh. Okay, so our week, we've already talked about some of the things that we go through leading up to the Sabbath. But, at the end of the Sabbath, let's talk about that. So on Erev Shabbat, we sit down, and Melanie and I talked about it, and we have decided that on this page, the Facebook page, until such time as we find some other technology, we have to use Facebook. But we have decided that we are actually going to, not for show, but for education and for enrichment, we're going to do our Shabbat service live for you. We're not going to interact with you. We're just going to put the camera on and do what we usually do every week and let you see how we usher in the Sabbath and see the ceremonies, because I know there's some new people who have never seen it, never participated in it, and I wanted you to be able to see that and do that. Some of what we will do will be things that we do ourselves that are customary only in our home. That's very few things, but and you may not even catch those, but the rest of what we do you'll see in the Siddur. So if you don't have the Siddur, let me know. But we want you to see it because we want you to understand what we've been talking about in regard to the prophetic nature of it. And so come Shabbat, we are going to, start preparing on the sixth day. Typically, we try to cook a double portion so that we don't have to cook another meal on Shabbat. A lot of times that works out for us. Sometimes it doesn't. We're not so worried about it when we don't. But we manage somehow usually. But we will cook the meal. The meal will be prepared. The bread will be prepared. The wine will be prepared. The table, the shulchan, will be set. And then what's the first thing that we do? We light the lights, just like the world, the creation of the world began with the declaration of "Let there be light." We light the lights on the Sabbath, and that begins the actual lighting of the lights in your home begins the Sabbath for you. Back then they didn't have clocks, and they didn't know what Joe Jew was doing down the road, but Jim Jew over here lit his lights, and okay, the Sabbath is starting. Anybody that's in this house has to stop their work. Okay, so and we bless the wine. And we as Messianic people bless the wine in regard to remembering Yeshua, just like he said. So Joe mentioned it already. We understand Passover. Our Jewish people have for understand that Shabbat is a little mini Passover. It has the same elements of Passover in it, bread and wine. It's just that on Shabbat the bread is not unleavened. It's only on Passover that it's actually unleavened bread. So, but nonetheless, there is bread and wine, and we bless the wine, and then we bless the bread, and then we rejoice and sing songs, and then we bless each other, and then we sing some more songs, and then we eat, and then we thank God for having fed us, and thank Him for feeding the whole world, and then we read a weekly psalm that is read on Shabbat. There's a whole host of psalms that you can choose from to read on Shabbat. 92 is one of them, which we've already mentioned, but there's others. Primarily 95 through about 98 or 99, somewhere along in there, are customary to be read at some point on Shabbat. So that's what we do. And then we're also going to do the next night, do the Havdalah service, because I know there's people that have even been Messianic for a while that have never really pulled off a successful Havdalah service. So we're going to record ours for you there. And ours is very brief. We're going to do it in English because around here we only do it in Hebrew. We've been doing it so long, Melanie understands what we're saying. She's got them memorized. So, but we're going to do the full service. We'll do it in Hebrew and English so that you can see them. And what I want you to see is that I want you to start looking at Passover. And many of you, the names that I've seen, you've kept Passover before, and you understand the prophetic nature of Passover and how that Yeshua fulfilled it. So you will see that. But then you have Havdalah, which is commemorative of his resurrection. And so we're going to do that. So those are commemorative more than anything, but it's still also very prophetic in the sense of Yom Teruah is the 7th feast. And so in a way, Shabbat lines up with Yom Teruah. I'm sorry, it's not. It's the 5th feast. Scratch that, but it's in the 7th month is what I meant to say.
Yes.
It's in the 7th Chodesh. So in one sense, it lines up with Shabbat. Any questions? Are y'all still with me?
I'm sure they are.
Mueller? No questions? Yeah, and that's all you really can do, Joe. Hopefully everybody sees his comment. I've never done Erev Shabbat or Havdalah properly, just doing the best I can and pray for grace. That's all you can do. And so there's an analogy I used to give that
We had to learn it too.
there was it's an old Jewish proverb actually that basically says, the rabbi asks his rabbi, his rabbi had a dream. He says, we were both headed, we were climbing on the ladder to heaven, and I was just wondering which of us is closer to God. And he said, he turned around and looked at his young student, and he says, who was moving toward him? Okay, so as long as you are moving forward, you are the recipient of all of his chesed and chen, his compassion and his grace, and he is not standing there trying to smack you on the head because you didn't keep Sabbath perfectly. And there are people who think like that, who think that God is going to love you less if you don't keep his Sabbath perfectly. That's not the spirit of the Torah. That's not how Elohim looks at this. And Yeshua tried to teach that to Israel, but they rejected it. He had people griping at him because his Talmudim wouldn't wash their hands. He had people griping at him because his Talmudim were picking grain on the Sabbath and eating it because they were hungry. And he tried to show them that that's not the spirit of the Sabbath. The Sabbath is a sweet thing to God, and he means for it to be a sweet thing to his people. And he knows that, Joe Redneck growing up in Texas for 40, 50 years and never done a Hebrew service in his life is not going to be able to do it perfectly the first time. He completely understands. You should have seen our first Passover and our first Shabbat. It was ridiculous. But I guarantee you this, the Father in heaven, it's like a child learning to walk. I can remember when my son was little and Jake walked very early, and I was so joyous to see him stand on his own 2 little feet. And if he could have expressed how he felt, he'd have been like, oh, I can't stand up, oh, I'm falling. He was frustrated, with himself. But I guarantee you, much like the joy that I had when my son first took a few steps, that's how God feels about us when we take another step closer to him and closer to his ways. So it doesn't matter that you don't do it perfectly. We still don't do it perfectly, and it's like I said, things fight us on it. It's like tonight, fighting to get online, going to 3 different browsers trying to get online and be on time. And if anybody knows me, I'm a punctual person. I can't stand being late,
Yeah.
But I did what I could do. So Elohim has great mercy and compassion for us, and just wants us to do it. He just wants us to put our foot forward. And he swoops in and does it all anyway. And that's what you'll find if you'll relax and be in him when it happens. That's what you'll find is he'll swoop in and make it the best thing you ever had. If you'll just chill out and let him do it. So we've got about 15 minutes left. I'm kind of at a transition point in my study. Are there any questions in particular about Shabbat and about things we've already talked about? I don't want to jump into the next part of this just yet with what little time we've got. Any questions? I will wait just a minute or two more. No questions, huh? Let me see. If y'all don't want me to fill up these 15 minutes, I might sign off early. You don't have any questions about Shabbat?
Putting them on the spot and they're like going back. Trying to think. When we get off, they'll.
What you got, Jim? The wine miracle in Cana being on the third day. I thought I mentioned that, and Melanie mentioned something that I thought I had mentioned, so I'll just do a little bit of a review of both of those. So Melanie mentioned the third day, and I think I said it when she had to step out of the room for a minute. But so the third day was the day that the trees and the shrub and the grass and all of the plant life was created, and especially tree bearing fruit. Okay, and seeds. And so what Yeshua did when he turned water into wine, it was a creative miracle. Yes, we'll do the filming this Shabbat, Janet. So Yeshua turning water into wine was a creative miracle. Elohim spoke, and that's all Yeshua did is speak. Okay, Elohim spoke, and the land came out of the water, and when he spoke again, the fruit trees with fruit in them, in other words, mature trees, came on that day. And that's what a lot of people don't realize is this is telling the creation days are 24 hours long, because if he is years long or a billion years long, the trees would have died without the sun and the moon and the stars. And that's what Melanie was pointing out. Okay? So, but what you're showing himself to be the force of creation itself, because he spoke and said, do whatever, his mother said, do whatever he tells you, and Yeshua said what? I'm struggling to remember exactly what he said, but it was basically just instructions. Go and fill the jars up with water. And that's basically all he said. And when they went and drew water, because he said to fill them up, it wasn't water, it was wine. So he turned the water into wine. He did a creative miracle, and that happened on the third day, which is when fruit was created. And wine is representative of fruit itself. Vore pri hagafen, vore pri, who creates the fruit. Okay? So
On the third day.
so he did that on the third day, and that's when the wedding was, when he created the wine. And so that's when fruit was created, is on the third day. And so he was echoing creation and basically showing that he himself was the power of creation, just like John had said 2 chapters earlier and said, dear. Just 2 chapters in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was Elohim. So he's basically affirming who he is when he does that. So I think it is very significant. Any other questions? If not, we're going to sign off. All right. You have